industrial skyline as black-clad FBI units stormed a trucking compound on the south side. Within seconds, gunfire echoed through the steel corridors. What the agents uncovered beneath the smoke would redefine America's war on organized crime, a narco-empire hidden in plain sight. How could one of the nation's busiest freight hubs become the beating heart of a cartel's logistics network? The raid, launched under direct orders from President Donald Trump's administration, marked the start of Operation Iron Horse, a nationwide offensive against the alliance between the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club and Mexico's two most violent cartels, Sinaloa and CJNG. What began as a midnight seizure of a warehouse evolved into the largest coordinated biker cartel crackdown in U.S. history. Inside that warehouse lay the evidence of industrial-scale narcotics trafficking pallets of methamphetamine disguised as auto parts refrigerated trucks stacked with hidden cash, encrypted radios traced to cartel safe houses in Mexico, and Belgian assault rifles loaded and ready to fire. By dawn, 6 suspects were dead, 14 wounded, and 1 facility reduced to ashes. Yet behind the blood and wreckage, investigators saw something far more dangerous, a logistics model designed to move drugs, money, and weapons with corporate precision. According to FBI and Homeland Security reports cited by Reuters and The Guardian, the network had operated undetected for years, blending legal interstate trucking with illicit cargo. Freight routes from Tijuana to Chicago, then north to Toronto and Montreal, carried everything from synthetic drugs to laundered cash. The Hells Angels acted as couriers, enforcers, and transporters, while the cartels provided supply chains and security. Strategically, this alliance blurred the line between organized crime and global commerce. The bikers controlled infrastructure trucks, warehouses, logistics firms, and the cartels provided the product and capital. Together, they built an economy of shadows. Analysts from DW compare it to a hybrid warfare model, decentralized, adaptive, and almost impossible to dismantle in one strike. What happened that night in Chicago mirrors global patterns, from Ukrainian smuggling corridors disrupted by war to Iranian arms shipments shadowing Gulf trade routes to Chinese proxy networks using shipping hubs for covert technology transfers. Crime, commerce, and geopolitics now intersect more tightly than ever. And beneath the geopolitical chessboard lies a human cost overdoses rising in Midwestern towns, families torn apart, and communities hollowed by addiction. Law enforcement faces a grim paradox: how to secure America's freedom without turning its highways into battlefields. As dawn broke over the Great Lakes, smoke still rose from the shattered compound. But one question echoed from Washington to Mexico City: was this raid the end of a hidden empire, or just the opening move in a deeper, more dangerous war? The operation had a name long before dawn broke: Operation Iron Horse. In the war rooms of Homeland Security, analysts drew red lines on digital maps connecting Chicago, Joliet, Gary, and Rockford, the arteries of an invisible empire. The mission was simple in principle, yet immense in scale: dismantle the biker-run freight network that had become the cartel's lifeline inside the United States. Under President Trump's direct order, the Department of Justice authorized multi-state raids coordinated across Illinois, Indiana, and California, involving more than 700 federal agents. FBI violent crimes, Task Force, ICE, Homeland Security investigations, and local SWAT teams executed synchronized breaches. Inside these warehouses, investigators discovered not chaos, but design. Ledgers, encrypted hard drives, and digital manifests mapped shipments to ports in Texas, Arizona, and even Vancouver. It wasn't street crime, it was enterprise. On paper, the companies looked legitimate: trucking firms, logistics contractors, repair depots. In reality, they were shells, their routes doubling as narcotics corridors. One FBI source cited by Reuters described the system as an Amazon for organized crime. Agents uncovered over 60 firearms, $1 million in cash, and hundreds of kilograms of meth, cocaine, and fentanyl, all masked behind walls of freight containers marked "Made in Mexico." The Hells Angels had mastered invisibility through bureaucracy. Each delivery was paired with real bills of lading fake invoices, and legitimate clients unaware that their goods shared space with death itself. Strategically, the raid signaled more than a law enforcement victory. It was the US government's declaration of total war on hybrid syndicates, criminal networks that fuse domestic gangs with foreign cartels. Defense analysts told Jane's Defense Weekly that such alliances mirror military supply chains, decentralized logistics units, layered communication, and compartmentalized funding, the same architecture used in asymmetric warfare. In global perspective, Iron Horse resembled NATO counterinsurgency campaigns. Just as Western forces disrupt supply routes in eastern Ukraine, the FBI sought to cut off narcotic supply lines before they reached American cities. Intelligence officers warned that failing to act would turn the Midwest into the cartel equivalent of Donbass contested ground, where shadow economies thrive under fire. Meanwhile, violence flared beyond borders. Al Jazeera reported similar cartel biker affiliations surfacing in Australia and Spain, suggesting that globalization had given organized crime the same tools that enabled global trade speed data and plausible legitimacy. The battlefield had changed, and the enemy no longer wore uniforms. But amid the tactical brilliance and media spectacle, a deeper question emerged: what happens to freedom when every truck, phone, and warehouse becomes suspect? Security has a cost, and the people living along those freight routes, the drivers, the dock workers, the small-town clerks, now feel its weight. As Operation Iron Horse expanded, more raids followed California, Massachusetts, and Canada. Federal prosecutors promised that this was only the beginning, yet in the words of one Chicago field agent quoted by The Guardian, every arrest creates a vacancy someone else will fill. The raid tore down walls, but could it rebuild trust? Or was America entering a new phase, a permanent state of internal vigilance where the lines between liberty and control blur beneath the hum of diesel engines on the highway? Long before the night Chicago burned, the legend of the Hells Angels was written in rebellion, roaring engines, open roads, and a defiant creed: loyalty above law. But over the decades, that mythology mutated into something colder and far more profitable. The Outlaw Brotherhood became a multinational syndicate. Their leather jackets turned into uniforms of an empire that spanned continents. What began as a subculture had evolved into a criminal corporation, one fluent in finance, logistics, and intimidation. Inside the Chicago warehouses raided under Operation Iron Horse agents found the digital fingerprints of that transformation. Documents traced the ownership of freight companies, repair depots, and import-export firms registered under shell corporations from Nevada to Ontario. Every asset told the same story: the Hells Angels had reinvented themselves as middlemen between the cartels and the consumer. Federal reports obtained by BBC News described the organization as a vertically integrated logistics chain, a phrase once reserved for corporations, not criminals. The bikers didn't just transport narcotics, they owned the trucks, leased the storage yards, and managed the repair shops. For the Sinaloa and CJNG cartels, that meant access to American infrastructure without crossing the border, a priceless advantage in the age of surveillance and border control. Yet what made the network truly dangerous was its invisibility. It didn't rely on a single leader, but on dozens of semi-autonomous chapters operating like corporate franchises. Each cell knew its routes, customers, and suppliers, but rarely the full picture. To the FBI, it looked less like a gang and more like a decentralized supply chain of organized defiance. From a strategic perspective, this adaptation mirrors the evolution of modern warfare. Military scholars from Defense News note that the Hells Angels applied the same decentralized command principles seen in Russian hybrid operations in Ukraine: local autonomy, shared ideology, limited traceability. What Moscow perfected on the battlefield, these bikers refined in commerce. Globally, parallels emerge elsewhere. In Iran's shadow economy, Revolutionary Guard networks operate similarly legitimate shipping companies moving sanctioned goods through legal trade routes. In China, covert maritime logistics support the transfer of restricted dual-use technologies across the South China Sea. The same principle applies: hide illegal activity inside legitimate systems until the two become indistinguishable. But at home, the transformation carried a human cost. Once symbols of freedom and counterculture, the Angels' infrastructure became the bloodstream of addiction. Entire neighborhoods along the Midwest trucking corridors began collapsing under fentanyl overdoses and violent debt collections. A network that once celebrated rebellion now fed despair. The challenge for the Trump administration's law enforcement apparatus was philosophical as much as tactical. How does a free society confront an enemy that mimics its own economic logic? The same highways that carry medicine, food, and fuel also carry narcotics and death. To control one is to risk constraining the other. Experts warn that this is the new face of criminal globalization: fluid, adaptive, and self-sustaining. And as the Hells Angels empire crumbled under federal pressure, one question remained unanswered in every briefing room from Washington to Ottawa: when rebellion becomes business and business becomes crime, who really controls the road? Far from Chicago's flashing lights, another front in this silent war had already taken shape in Canada. There, investigators uncovered what they called the Northern Pipeline, a vast narcotics route stretching from British Columbia's coastal ports through Ontario's highways into the US Midwest. What made it alarming wasn't just the drugs, it was who controlled them. By 2023, intelligence briefings shared between U.S. Homeland Security and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police revealed that the Sinaloa cartel had quietly embedded itself in Canada not through bloodshed but through business. According to Reuters and The Guardian, Sinaloa's Los Chapitos faction, led by the sons of El Chapo, invested in logistics firms, freight terminals, and even chemical suppliers near Vancouver. They partnered with local biker groups, the Hells Angels, first among them to move synthetic opioids produced in secret super labs hidden in warehouse districts. The strategy was revolutionary in its simplicity: manufacture closer to the market, cut transport costs, and reduce border exposure. As one BBC analyst noted, why smuggle through the southern border when you can produce north of it? By shifting operations to Canada, Sinaloa turned the continent's geography into a single continuous narcotics grid. The Angels' role was pivotal. Their control of highways from Montreal to Michigan provided the infrastructure to ferry both legal cargo and concealed contraband. Each refrigerated truck carried 2 manifests, one for customs, one for the cartel. Every legitimate shipment of produce or auto parts masked bricks of fentanyl or stacks of cash. For years, the system operated in plain sight. Law enforcement raids in Quebec and Alberta uncovered over 30 arrests and 200 charges, seizing millions in cocaine and meth. But these numbers only scratched the surface. The network had grown too entangled with legitimate trade to separate cleanly. Economists interviewed by DW compared it to Europe's black market energy trade, so deeply fused with legal commerce that removing it risked collapsing entire local economies. Strategically, this northern infiltration transformed the war on drugs into a continental chessboard. It mirrored the proxy front seen elsewhere in 2025, Iran's shadow networks across Syria and Lebanon, or China's influence operations in Southeast Asia. Each uses partnerships, intermediaries, and plausible deniability to expand reach while avoiding direct confrontation. For the US, the Northern Front was a warning America's drug war could no longer be fought solely at the southern border. The human toll was immediate. In Ontario alone, opioid deaths surged by 60% within 2 years. Small towns once known for maple exports became epicenters of chemical trafficking. Canadian families faced a crisis they had long associated with their southern neighbor: addiction, violence, and corruption infiltrating local governance. Federal agents on both sides of the border began to ask a chilling question. Had North America already lost control of its trade arteries? When every truck, every port, every customs terminal can serve both commerce and crime, where does sovereignty truly reside? The revelation pushed Washington and Ottawa into tighter cooperation under the Homeland Security Task Force framework, turning the US-Canada border from a line of defense into a shared battlefield. As the Northern Pipeline came into focus, one truth emerged: this was no longer just about drugs. It was about control. Control of trade, control of territory, and ultimately control of the narrative. And in that fight, both nations found themselves confronting an enemy as sophisticated as any state, a network without flags, borders, or fear. The Homeland Security Task Force Initiative, HSTF, was born from crisis, a realization that America's traditional law enforcement playbook could no longer keep pace with transnational syndicates that behaved more like corporations than cartels. When President Donald Trump authorized the nationwide expansion of HSTF in early 2025, it represented a new doctrine: treat organized crime as a national security threat. In practice, this meant more than arrests. It meant fusion, combining intelligence from the FBI, ICE, DEA, and Customs and Border Protection into one real-time network. Over 6,000 open cases now flow through this system, many tracing directly to cartel intermediaries, biker chapters, and corrupt logistics firms. Each seized phone hard drive or crypto wallet feeds a central digital intelligence core built to map criminal ecosystems as precisely as military operations. According to Defense News, the structure mirrors the counterterrorism models once used in Iraq and Afghanistan, integrates surveillance, finance tracking, and ground operations into a unified chain of action. The battlefield has simply shifted from desert roads to interstate highways, from militant cells to freight networks. Inside the HSTF war rooms, analysts project glowing lines across satellite maps, truck routes, shipping lanes, encrypted communications, even cryptocurrency transfers. What emerges isn't chaos, but pattern. Chicago, Los Angeles, Vancouver, Houston, all pulsing nodes of a criminal web spanning North America. Officials describe it as mapping a living organism. To strengthen cooperation, the US linked its HSTF to Canada's Integrated Border Enforcement Teams, IBETS, and Europe's Europol Transcrime Division, creating one of the most comprehensive intelligence grids in modern history. Yet, as The Guardian warns, this unprecedented power comes with moral tension: how to balance national security with civil liberty. The same digital tools that expose cartel activity can, in the wrong hands, monitor ordinary citizens. Globally, parallels abound. In Eastern Europe, NATO's intelligence fusion centers track Russian arms smugglers using near-identical data analysis. In the Middle East, Israeli cyber units dismantle Hezbollah's financial pipelines with algorithmic precision. Across the Pacific, US naval task forces monitor Chinese commercial vessels suspected of dual-use technology transfers. The common thread: the battlefield of the 21st century is data. Back home, the HSTF's victories are measurable. Since its expansion, over $4.7 billion in assets have been seized, 380 cartel-linked operations dismantled, and more than 2,000 high-value arrests conducted. But behind every success lies a shadow. Critics, including civil rights groups cited by BBC News, warn that the line between surveillance and privacy grows thinner each year. The state's reach deepens, and with it comes the specter of perpetual oversight. For families living along America's freight corridors, the consequences are tangible. Constant checkpoints, drone surveillance, and armed raids have turned once quiet neighborhoods into militarized zones. The balance between protection and intrusion tilts uneasily with every new directive. Strategically, the Trump administration frames HSTF as both shield and sword, a system to restore deterrence against criminal hybrid networks that challenge US sovereignty. Analysts argue it is also a geopolitical message to adversaries that America is willing to mobilize its domestic power with the same precision it projects abroad. Yet a question lingers over the program's success. Can a system built on surveillance ever truly restore freedom? Or does it risk creating a security state where safety comes at the cost of trust? As one senior FBI official told Reuters, "We've learned how to see everything. The real question is what we'll do with what we see." But just as the Hells Angels empire fell, another force moved to claim the ashes. Its name echoed through intelligence reports like a storm warning: Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación CJNG. Ruthless, fast, and digitally agile CJNG became the most aggressively expanding narco organization in the Western Hemisphere by 2025. What the Sinaloa cartel, built through diplomacy, CJNG sought to seize through speed and disruption. Within months of the Chicago raids, Homeland Security analysts began detecting CJNG-linked shipments crossing through Texas, California, and Illinois, often using smaller biker factions and local transport firms left fractured after Operation Iron Horse. According to Reuters and DW, these remnants provided CJNG a ready-made skeleton of distribution, the ghost of the Hells Angels network reborn under new management. The cartel's rise wasn't confined to narcotics. It specialized in cyber logistics, encrypted communications, cryptocurrency laundering, and autonomous delivery routes coordinated through digital ledgers. In a world where warfare, finance, and crime now share algorithms, CJNG evolved into a hybrid threat. Intelligence officials described it as a cartel that thinks like a tech startup and kills like a militia. Strategically, the battle for Chicago mirrored conflicts playing out far beyond America's borders. In Ukraine, power struggles hinge on logistics corridors, railways, ports, and fuel lines. In the Middle East, Israel and Iran wage a shadow war through proxy militias and drone strikes. In Asia, the US-China rivalry centers on control of shipping lanes, data cables, and rare earth supply chains. Everywhere, control of movement equals control of power. The narco war, though criminal in nature, follows the same logic: whoever controls the routes controls the future. Federal analysts told The Guardian that CJNG's tactics resemble hostile takeovers: identify weakened competitors, absorb their networks, and dominate territory through terror and incentives alike. Chicago, once Sinaloa's northern hub, became contested ground, a new front line, where Mexican cartels test America's resilience not with bullets alone, but with economics. By late 2025, gunfire and explosions in suburban freight yards were no longer isolated incidents, but symptoms of a deeper contest. Local biker gangs, absorbed or coerced by CJNG operatives, fought for control of warehouses and transport contracts. Law enforcement sources describe this as corporate warfare with casualties. For the Trump administration, this second phase demanded escalation. Joint task forces intensified operations under Homeland Enforcement Directive Delta, authorizing cross-agency raids and electronic warfare measures against cartel communication grids. Drones, once reserved for overseas theaters, now patrolled domestic skies. The message was unmistakable: the battlefield had come home. Yet amid the victories, unease lingers. Each new strike strengthens security but weakens privacy. Each raid saves lives, yet risks another cycle of vengeance. And through it all, Chicago stands as a microcosm of America's modern dilemma, a nation fighting for its safety while guarding its soul. The question haunting policymakers and citizens alike remains unresolved. Can the United States win a war where the enemy is not a nation, but a network, one that learns, adapts, and regenerates faster than it can be destroyed? As night once again falls over the Great Lakes, the hum of freight trucks echoes across the highways. Somewhere within them, commerce and crime still share the same road, and as long as they do, the war that began in that Chicago warehouse will never truly end. Operation Iron Horse exposed an unprecedented alliance between the Hells Angels and Mexico's Sinaloa and CJNG cartels, a transnational logistics empire disguised as ordinary trade. Under President Trump's directive, federal forces executed simultaneous raids across Chicago and multiple states, uncovering billions in narcotics, weapons, and cash. The crackdown revealed how biker networks had evolved into corporate-like supply chains, moving drugs under the cover of legitimate freight. As investigations expanded, North Canada emerged as a critical hub, the Northern Pipeline, where cartels embedded within legitimate commerce. The Homeland Security Task Force Initiative responded with a fusion of intelligence, surveillance, and joint enforcement, reshaping America's internal defense doctrine. Yet victory proved temporary. CJNG surged into the vacuum using technology and speed to seize control of disrupted routes. The struggle for Chicago became symbolic of a global era, one where crime power and data merge. The central question endures: in defending freedom, how much must America sacrifice to